Yeah. Good morning and welcome to Weekend Walkabout, our gardens and yours virtually.
We're coming to you from GardenAtoZ.org, and I'm Janet McConovich.
I'm Stephen Nicola, and this week we're talking, our main feature will be basic indoor gardening.
We're getting to that time of year now.
Yep.
We have been outside this week, but we've been pulling back in now as it gets good and cold out there. Steve takes most of the pictures. I do most of the words on our efforts to help other gardeners share their experiences. We like to share with you what we've learned, but we learned so much from you. Our daughter, Sonia Nicola, is the voice that you'll hear and the commanding presence on the chat. Sonia is a lifelong gardener, but she is a professor at the University of Toronto, where they've been doing virtual classes for 2 years. And she's very good at figuring things out. If you've got technical problems, or if you have a question for us as we go along, because we do have question and answer sessions. I think there are 4 built in today. When we get to a question and answer session, Sonia can take questions that have been chatted by those who, like me, forget the question right after I formulate it. If I don't write it down somewhere, she'll take those questions that you type in the chat and line them up for us for a question and answer session. So ask her about technical trouble and put your questions there for her.
Yeah, we found out very quickly we needed a third person to help us out when we first started doing these, because we couldn't do the chat and everything. And Sonia's been a
lifesaver.
Yes.
She's been a gift all her life. We do most of our writing on GardenAtoZ.org, although some of you know us from back when we wrote in the Detroit News for 13 years, Michigan Gardener for 10 years, or Better Homes and Gardens. But we've been gardening professionally, and that's where we get most of our information. Then we sit down at the desk and find out what we missed out there.
We should really change it to 40 years now.
I will get doing that. We're going to start with In Our Garden for just a quick thing this week, because we got birds on the brain.
Yeah, I've always got birds on the brain.
And what it is, this week in our gardens is one of the departments in our news section on our website. What's Up is the news section, and this week in our gardens is where we put articles about just what's happening right now. And what's happening right now has to do with this. We weren't out in the garden very much because you'll see my sewing machine is out there, and there's fur around, and I can see red thread and red velvet. We're making Stephen a new Santa suit for this season. And so I've been trapped inside and telling him that if there's a nice day out there and I miss it, it's Santa's fault this year. But what I'm looking at in that picture, and I'm sure Sonia sees, is that the blinds are down on the window. I am very sensitive to dark. I need light. So that window is always open. But thanks to a couple, more than a couple, about 6 people sent us the link to a webinar by Audubon this week about bird glass collision, since we talked about it last week. I don't know, the week before that. Well, I sat in on that webinar, and there wasn't much revelatory information in it. If birds run into your windows, which happens a lot, to the tune of 1 billion a year all over the world, and not just in the big buildings.
It's not the big buildings, the really tall ones.
Yeah, the really tall ones get the migratory birds, but day by day, all through the year, those birds that are thumping into your window because they don't know that they can't go through it, or because it's reflecting the tree that they think they're going to land in. Those birds you might not find dead by the window because they went off into the shrub and keeled over, or because something grabbed the body, as some scavenger did. And things do hit that window, despite the fact that we have decals all over it. The strategies remain to cover the window somehow.
With a film or something.
With a film that makes it not reflective, or put a pattern on it of dots, for instance, that are 2 inches apart. So you turn your window into a dotted look through, or close the blinds. And, there's something about sitting, even though there wasn't a lot of revelatory information for an hour, sitting and listening to other people in Audubon talk about what's going on with the birds. It didn't make you sit and reflect. And I thought, well, Janet, why don't you close the window? Why don't you cover the window? Because when you're not in the office, who cares?
We don't need the light there now.
Right. You can at least cut the light down, cut the reflectivity down, and put a barrier on that window when you're not in the office, which is more often during the day than not, except when you're sewing on a Santa suit. So you might want to try that simple
I
solution.
haven't heard one hit either of those 2 windows.
And sometimes we get 2 or 3 hits a day, not hard hits, but hits.
Enough.
So birds have been on our brain because
Yeah.
we really appreciate the birds. We like watching the motion, the hearing the sound. We love that they're eating the number of insects that they are out there.
Yeah, they entertain us.
So that's that plus, let's see, we're going to stop share. Oh, we're going to try this fancy stuff here. Also in our garden this week, in the little bit that I was outside, because sitting and sewing a Santa suit, sewing and sewing and sewing and sitting and sitting and sitting gets to be really tough. So I go outside and I've been raking leaves and doing other things that just let me move my whole body for a while.
Yeah.
What have you still got blooming in your garden? Go ahead and put it into chat. See the Corydalus lutea, the golden bleeding heart, still blooming and still looking beautiful. There are other things that are still blooming. The Veronica is still blooming, but its leaves look
Pretty
more
ratty.
tattered. Doesn't even describe how
Yeah.
they look. This is just gorgeous. It's still, even though the hydrangeas leaves have finally gotten killed back, this is still sitting there 12 inches
Yep.
from the ground, a mound full of a dozen flowers on it, and it's been blooming all summer long. Gretchen has Corylus still blooming too. Hardy iris are still blooming. Mums, right? Of course, some of the mums
Oh,
are
yeah,
still
mum.
out there. And the snapdragons. I'm so sorry we had to take the snapdragons down at the library because those guys, they'll freeze solid and come right back again.
There are some dandelions out there too.
One year it was nearly Christmas, so there were geraniums, still
Mhm.
pelargoniums, the annual geranium. And some things, this is our sweet gum tree, which we put out there in order to give some color for the neighbor in that particular area. We appear to have put it in the most protected place in our whole
Because
yard.
it's still green.
These leaves are totally green, it's totally still well attached out there. But last night did it. The calendula finally said, I can't handle this any longer.
Yeah,
That's too
it
much.
just got,
Too much cold. And the campanula is still blooming. This is the Serbian bellflower. And one of the reasons it's still blooming is because it's so close to the
it's
house.
protected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a white phlox still blooming at the library that we cut down too. So you're going to want to lamium blooming. Wow, now that's pretty cool. And roses. We had our last rose one year on the 1st of
Yeah.
December, Mr. Lincoln, the 1st of
Yeah,
December.
yellow
So
one out there is done.
so those are the kinds of things that are going on out there. Our gardens do not leave us, we leave them. So get out there, walk around and see what's blooming. Okay, let's go back to share, Steve. Could you share screen? Because we need to move on to gardening. We have and share. I always forget that second click. So if you have any questions, or if there were any questions lined up there, Sonia will take those now before we move on, because Shane is here and Interior Plants are calling us, and it's a really good opportunity to hear from a true expert.
Yeah, we don't have too much in the way of questions. So Barbara is very kindly clarifying that closing the inside blinds does not entirely remove the reflectivity that's still there. So on the webinar she went to, they emphasized that films, et cetera, can still be attached to the outside of the window to prevent.
Right, and those films are of interest today for indoor gardening too. I'm hesitant to use those films because although they do cut the reflectivity down, they do also cut down the number of the amount of light that's coming through the window.
Gets in.
We have great glass now they're making glass that keeps the heat in but lets the light in. But some of these surfaces that we put on there, it's hard to balance all of these things that we're trying to do together.
Great. And then I think we can move on to indoor plants. We have one request already to be sure that we talk about mites.
Okay, yes.